If you care about whether American institutions still function when power refuses to yield, you need to slow down and absorb what just happened on Capitol Hill. This was the moment the system blinked. And no one knows yet what blinks back. This is not a routine news cycle. And I want to be precise about that, because precision matters when institutions are under stress. What unfolded in the House of Representatives was not a dramatic headline searching for attention. It was Congress striking a match close to the core of the Constitution and discovering almost immediately that the fire does not stay contained. Here's where you need to understand the context. The House has approved articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. The vote was not decisive. It was not commanding. It was not stabilizing. It passed by a single vote. 218 in favor, 217 against. One vote separating action from collapse. Let me say that again so it lands properly. One vote. That margin is not just a number. In institutional terms, it is a warning. Light. Because razor-thin outcomes do not signal unity, they signal fracture. They tell every actor in the system that half the chamber believes the country is facing an urgent and existential threat, while the other half believes the process itself is the danger. Those are not positions that compromise easily. Those are positions that harden. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere was described as heavy. Lawmakers were not merely recording preferences, they were choosing futures. And that matters, because when votes are this close, legitimacy becomes fragile, public perception becomes volatile, party discipline weakens, and suddenly breaking ranks feels both more dangerous and more tempting at the same time. This is not the finish line. This was the starting gun. The House vote does not resolve anything. It triggers everything. It converts political disagreement into institutional motion. And once that machinery starts moving, individual control becomes an illusion. Almost immediately, Trump responded publicly. He called the vote a political hit job. He made it clear he has no intention of stepping aside. According to people close to him, his legal team would have preferred discipline and restraint. They wanted controlled messaging, fewer sparks, less gasoline. That did not happen because restraint has never been his operating system. He moves on instinct, on dominance, on refusing to concede even a centimeter. And that posture is not accidental. It resonates with a segment of the electorate that does not want negotiation. They want confrontation. They interpret compromise as weakness and escalation as proof of strength. This is where the story shifts from a person to a system. At the same time, Trump went loud. Something else happened that matters just as much. Key Republican leadership went quiet. No immediate counteroffensive, no unified messaging, no visible shield raised around the institution of the presidency. That silence is not confusion, and it is not absence. In Washington, silence during a crisis is often a form of strategy. It signals that powerful figures are measuring the room, counting votes, assessing risk, watching donors, tracking internal polling, calculating which direction survival points. This is not normal. When leaders with megaphones choose not to use them, it usually means the math is not settled. It means no one wants to be on the wrong side of a moving line. And in moments like this, the line moves fast. The narrowness of the vote amplifies everything that comes next. It affects how legitimate the process feels to the public. It affects whether senators feel safe crossing party lines. It affects whether institutional actors believe enforcement will hold if challenged. One vote does not just pass a motion. It exposes how thin the ice really is. And here is the part many people miss. A vote like this does not calm a system. It destabilizes it. Because every actor now understands that the margin for error is effectively zero. Any new information, any shift in public opinion, Any fracture inside party leadership can tip the balance in ways that were unthinkable when outcomes felt secure. According to reports, even those who believe the outcome is predetermined are already preparing for contingencies. That alone tells you something. Institutions do not prepare for inevitability, they prepare for volatility. This is why calling this a political fight misses the point. What we are watching is an institutional reflex under stress, a system responding to a challenge not just to authority, but to the idea that authority can still be transferred, constrained, or contained by rules everyone agrees to honor. The House acted. Trump rejected the premise. Party leadership paused. And the space between those moves is where instability lives. Because when power refuses to acknowledge process, the process has to decide how far it is willing to go to enforce itself. And buried inside this opening phase is a detail most people are still underestimating. One that quietly determines how much control any single actor actually has once the system fully engages. The central misunderstanding driving public reaction right now is simple and dangerous if left uncorrected. Impeachment is not removal. Not legally, not institutionally, not historically. Here's where you need to slow down. The House of Representatives does not remove presidents. It accuses them. Functionally, the House operates like a charging authority. It reviews conduct. It debates allegations. And then it votes on whether those allegations rise to the level of impeachment. That is all it does. It does not deliver a verdict. It does not impose a penalty. It does not end a presidency. That responsibility belongs to the Senate. And this is where the power shifts. Once articles of impeachment pass the House, the process moves into a different institutional ecosystem. The Senate becomes a trial court. Senators are no longer messaging to their districts. They are jurors inside a constitutional proceeding. Evidence matters. Procedure matters. And the threshold is deliberately unforgiving. To remove a sitting president, the Constitution requires a 2/3 vote of the Senate. 67 senators, not a simple majority, not political momentum. 67. Let me be clear about what that means in practice. Even if every Democrat and every aligned independent votes to convict, the math still does not work without a significant block of Republicans crossing party lines. Not one or two. A large number. Enough to overwhelm party loyalty, primary threats, donor pressure, and base backlash. That is not a hypothetical obstacle. It is a structural one. And we have already seen how this plays out. Donald Trump has been impeached before. The Senate did not remove him. Party cohesion held. Fear of voter retaliation held. The gravitational pull of the Trump political movement held. The dam bent, but it did not break. This is not about personality. It is about incentives. And incentives are why a second constitutional pathway keeps getting mentioned often with more confidence than it deserves. The 25th Amendment, Section 4. On paper, it looks dramatic. The Vice President, joined by a majority of the Cabinet, can declare the President unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. If invoked, authority transfers immediately to the Vice President. That sentence alone causes panic or hope, depending on who is reading it. But the next sentence matters more. The President can contest that declaration, and if he does, Congress decides to keep him sidelined. You need 2/3 support in both the House and the Senate. That threshold is higher than impeachment conviction. Higher. And the process requires something even more politically radioactive. The President's own cabinet, his appointees, his inner circle. They would have to turn on him publicly in a Trump-centered political environment that is not just difficult. It is personally and professionally explosive. Careers end there. Alliances shatter there. That path exists, but it is lined with institutional landmines. This is where many analysts stop. But the system does not. There is a third constitutional mechanism that unsettles strategists precisely because it does not follow familiar rules. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, often called the Insurrection Clause. This provision does not operate like impeachment. There is no formal charge trial conviction sequence. It is about eligibility, about whether someone who engaged in or gave aid to insurrection against the United States can hold office at all. That distinction is not academic. It is destabilizing. Eligibility disputes do not live in one chamber. They spill outward into courts, into Congress, into state election systems, into ballot access fights. And once that happens, there is no single referee. If this clause is seriously pursued, the battlefield multiplies. And this is why the House vote happened when it did. Power is shifting beneath the surface, quietly, unevenly. And the earliest signals of that shift are not speeches or press conferences. They are money flows, internal polling, private meetings with closed doors. When major donor networks hesitate, politicians feel it immediately. When fundraising slows, re-election plans wobble. And when re-election plans wobble, political courage becomes cheaper. According to reports, some figures in finance and technology, who once viewed Trump as a useful vehicle, now see him as volatility embodied, a destabilizing force, something that could rattle markets, strain governance, and saddle the party with losses that take a decade to unwind. This is not ideological. It is actuarial. Inside the Republican Party, this tension never fully resolved. One faction tolerated Trump for judges' tax policy and electoral advantage. Another treats him less as a politician and more as a symbol of defiance against the entire system. They coexist. They do not share the same endgame. Impeachment forces a choice. And unlike messaging battles, that choice cannot be camouflaged. That is why quiet meetings matter. According to accounts from inside Washington, senators are already talking without staff present. They are gaming out trial strategies, discussing what kind of evidence could change the math, measuring how much public reaction they can absorb. The mere fact that these conversations are happening tells you something important. Institutions do not rehearse outcomes they believe are impossible. Preparation is an admission that the ground could still move, and evidence is the lever that moves it. Impeachment trials are not just symbolic exercises. They can force documents into daylight. Text messages, internal communications, sworn testimony. Subpoenas have a way of collapsing private narratives. If material emerges, suggesting obstruction, intimidation, or coordination with individuals facing criminal exposure, the political cost of continued defense rises sharply. Loyalty becomes expensive. Silence becomes riskier than defection. This is the phase where systems strain, not because outcomes are known, but because uncertainty forces every actor to reassess their exposure. And when exposure calculations change, alliances follow. What looks like chaos on the surface is often recalibration underneath. And buried in that, recalibration is a question most people still are not asking loudly enough. How many of the rules holding this system together are enforced by law? And how many are enforced only because everyone assumes they will be respected? What comes next is not a prediction. It is a map of pressure points. 4 paths that are all plausible. 4 outcomes that test different parts of the system. None of them are clean. Scenario 1. Trump survives. The Senate trial proceeds. The votes are counted. 67 is not reached. Conviction fails. Institutionally, the process ends. Politically, it detonates. Trump declares total vindication. Not partial, not technical, absolute. His supporters interpret the outcome as proof that the system tried to destroy him and failed again. In that framing, impeachment becomes evidence of persecution, not accountability. And the behavioral shift matters. He does not soften, he sharpens. Louder rhetoric, harder lines, more direct confrontation. Survival becomes a mandate. Here's the institutional consequence that lingers long after the headlines fade. Accountability becomes conditional. The lesson absorbed by future presidents is not subtle. Control enough Senate seats, and almost anything is survivable. The check still exists on paper, but its teeth are blunted in practice. This is where President quietly reshapes behavior. Scenario 2. The dam breaks. Trump is removed. This outcome requires something extraordinary, not bad optics, not another scandal, not even cumulative fatigue. It requires a trigger so severe that defending him becomes more dangerous than abandoning him. Historically, collapses like this do not come from noise. They come from clarity, evidence that is simple, devastating, and impossible to explain away. A shift in public opinion that is sharp rather than gradual. And a decision by party leadership that preserving the institution matters more than preserving the individual. If that threshold is crossed, fear flips direction, silence breaks, votes move, removal becomes real. But even here, the system does not exhale. It holds its breath. Scenario 3. Removal followed by a legitimacy crisis. The Constitution provides the mechanism. It does not guarantee emotional compliance. If Trump is convicted and removed, but refuses to accept the outcome, the crisis moves from legality to enforcement. Recognition becomes the battlefield. Who is treated as commander-in-chief? Who does the federal bureaucracy follow? How do protective services respond? What signals do state officials take from Washington? Even limited refusal creates cascading uncertainty. The system is designed to handle disagreement. It is not designed to handle competing claims of authority at the top. Escalation in that environment can be fast, improvised, and without precedent. This is the scenario institutions fear most because rules alone cannot stabilize it. Scenario 4. The quiet exit. This is the option whispered about, rarely stated plainly. A negotiated off-ramp, senior figures, party leadership, legal intermediaries. An offer that trades resignation for some form of federal legal protection or assurances about what comes next. History shows that systems sometimes choose closure over prolonged instability, not justice versus injustice, stability versus fracture. But there is a complication that cannot be wished away. State-level legal exposure. Federal protection cannot erase it. No pardon reaches that far. Which means the leverage in any backroom deal is incomplete, messy, uncertain. A quiet exit sounds clean. In reality, it is fragile. Now, zoom out. This is not happening in isolation. Allies are watching American stability the way investors watch credit ratings. Not emotionally, calculatively. If the United States appears unable to govern itself or enforce its own constitutional outcomes, allies begin preparing contingencies. Not loudly, not publicly, but decisively. Adversaries notice something else: distraction, division, opportunity. Markets react the same way they always do to uncertainty. They do not like it. Political instability at the top of the world's largest economy sends tremors outward. Currency volatility. Defensive capital movement shifts toward perceived safe havens and a feedback loop forms. Political stress shakes markets. Market stress undermines political confidence. Each cycle tightens the next. Here is where the narrative stops being about one man. The House has acted. The Senate is now the arena. From here on, speeches matter less. Procedure matters more. Votes matter more. Evidence matters more. Nerve matters most. What we are watching is a stress test, not of popularity, not of ideology, of whether checks and balances still function when the cost of enforcing them is high, of whether institutions can produce outcomes that are not only legal but recognized as real. So the unresolved question hanging over all four scenarios is not who wins the moment, but something far more uncomfortable. Are American institutions strong enough to compel obedience when power refuses to yield? Or have they been held together all along by habit, assumption, and hope? Thank you for listening. Before you step away, share your perspective in the comments. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit like and subscribe. Then turn on notifications so you don't miss the most critical political developments as they break day after day. See you next time.